It's a beautiful morning and a wonderful way to start a day, witnessing history as it happens. Astronaut Sunita Williams, Butch Wilmore, Nick Hague, and Russian cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov have reached home safely. It was a bliss seeing the parachutes eject and capsule landing safely off the coast of Florida. We will be discussing this historic moment for the next 1 hour. Joining me now is my editor, Mr. S. Srinivasan, and I have Dr. Keith Siu with me too. Dr. Siu is a scientist at University College London. He studies rare diseases and extreme environments, including space medicine. Last year, he actually led a major study on space flight's impact on kidney health. And I have Dr. William Salvamurthy with me, who is a renowned Indian scientist and a former Director General of Life Sciences at DRDO, Defense Research and Development Organization. Thank you for joining Dr. Salvamurthy, Dr. CU, and Mr. Srinivasan. Now, I'd like to start my show with the visuals of Splashdown and recovery of the astronauts. So, can I have my producer Arun, who's with me in the back end, who will be helping us with the running visuals and graphics? Arun, may I please have the first visual of this rundown cued in, please?
Florida. And Splashdown, Crew 9 back on Earth.
In SpaceX Freedom, Splashdown. Good main release.
Copy Splashdown. We see main chutes cut. Nick.
So what I
And
learned
there
was
you have it. The
the
side hatch is open for the first time since September.
Yeah.
And there we do see Crew 9, some happy waves, smiles all around back on Earth.
Oh, looks like we're getting our next crew member here. That is none other than Sunny Williams. Big smile, big waves. She, like her other crew members, now will be assisted onto the mobility aid.
There we have it, some waves, some thumbs up, and some smiles.
It was lovely watching it again. And Srinisa, you'd like to begin?
Yeah, so I think there was a bit of a drama added. I was reading New York Times this morning, and something very interesting happened. As the capsule splashed down, which had traveled down to Earth speeds of 17,000 miles per hour. I'm sure there are other details about it, like there was so much heat that at 17,700 degree Fahrenheit, the the atoms are pulled, the electrons are off the atoms, and it was a kind of a situation where plasma was created around it, and the communication was off a few minutes. But then when it splashed down, there was a little drama when a pod of dolphins circled the capsule. It added a little playfulness to the whole episode, which people around the world, a bit tense about it. And for scientists, it's work as usual. In fact, I heard both, Sunita Williams and Wilmore giving an interview to newspapers sitting there in the spacecraft, and they were saying, it's work as usual, and they completely denied the fact that they were stressed or you know. But let me tell you something. But as a normal human being, when I travel to a town B from town A, and I plan for a 2 day or 3 day stay, and for some situation I have to stay longer, as a normal human being, I do get tense. But I think, like our experts will explain further, that these astronauts are trained and for longer stay. I'm sure you have you have worked out what are the there are other astronauts who stay much longer, and I'm sure you will tell us about that, Nisha.
Yes, absolutely, sir. Throughout the course of the show, we'll be seeing that part also. And let me come to Dr. Siu. So, Doctor, what happens to the human body the moment it re-enters Earth's gravity? Considering the high speed of the space capsule and the sudden transition from microgravity to full gravity. So, what physiological changes takes place in the body during this phase?
So once you've splashed back down on Earth and kind of got over the initial shock of re-entry, the first thing is probably going to be your blood pressure. So astronauts, when they're up in space, often have a lower blood pressure. And normally when you're standing up, your heart has to beat very fast, your blood vessels constrict as it's trying to keep blood going to your head. The astronauts may have adapted to microgravity and may not have retained this ability, so they have to relearn it almost. The body has to kind of kick back into it. So sometimes when astronauts are back on Earth, they can get episodes of low blood pressure, which causes them to faint. Other things that would have happened, they would have had partial deconditioning of their muscles. So you can lose up to 1% bone and muscle mass per month in space flight. So when they come back, they can have strength issues, bone mineral loss, and so they'll need to do several months of reconditioning to try to get them back up to a normal, healthier position. Same for the heart, it can shrink over time. So the astronauts do quite a lot of exercise when they're up in the space station to prevent the heart from shrinking. But they're going to be the main things. The other thing is going to be disorientation, so their sense of balance. So the vestibular system or their inner ear is not going to be used to have to readjust to gravity. And so balance can be a bit of an issue. And I've heard of astronauts for the first month forgetting that there's gravity and letting go of cups and they just fall and crash on the ground. So I think there's just some things to get used to in the first kind of month when you're back.
We'll talk more about their recovery process. What are the medical treatments involved? The physiotherapy involved to make them accustomed to Earth life again. Before that, I'd actually like to know, how does an astronaut actually physically feel during descent at such speeds? Is it comparable to the drop on a giant wheel ride, or is there any other sensation that best describes it?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Not having experienced it myself, I imagine it's like the most intense roller coaster ever. I imagine it's going to get hotter inside the module, so that's going to be definitely something that's going to be particularly around turbulence within there as well. They're going to potentially undergo high G forces, so fluid shifts as well. So they're probably having to train to clench, maintain. Maybe the main things that I would have considered when they're kind of re-entry, not too dissimilar to when they're taking off, they're experiencing high Gs as they're trying to decelerate.
Okay. We'll talk more on microgravity effect on human body, but let me come to Dr. William Selvamurthy now. Doctor, can you please tell us about the experiments currently being conducted on the ISS, particularly those related to human anatomy and diseases?
Yes. I think, first of all, congratulations to NASA and also the SpaceX for this wonderful mission they have executed. Because the way they have the mission planned for a few days, maybe about 9 to 10 days, extending to 9 months. So it's a great, the manner in which the exigencies and also the resilience they have in their system to moderate whatever needs to be done to keep the mission changed abruptly to such a longer mission. So compliments to each and every one of the space team which were involved. And also kudos to the astronauts who are able to adjust and have resilience, psychological robustness to look into such challenges which happen abruptly because of these troubles which they had in their technologies, like propulsion, the helium leak. So all that compelled them to stay for 9 months. But then they did wonderful experiments. For example, Sunita Williams was looking at aeroponics and hydroponics. Aeroponics is that in the air, the moisture available, can you create vegetables there? So like ISRO tested during the germination in the point 3, which they had sent recently, the germination of seeds, as well as from Amity University, we have sent the callus of spinach in the C60, the PSLV. So the food is very important. So they did experiments in this mission to look at how do we grow vegetables, because if the long missions you need to give fresh food besides the retard processed foods, meals ready to eat, which they have been eating the space food. So this is one experiment. The second experiment which they conducted was regarding circadian rhythm, because all our body functions are linked to solar periodicity. And so these cues are not there now, or it's permanently there with the solar cues. So how does your circadian rhythm or biorhythms will be adjusted, including sleep? So how do you condition with your social cues? How do you switch on the lights and switch off the lights so that your system gets conditioned to social cues rather than the solar cues? So this is another experiment they did, the circadian rhythm. They also collected the microbes around the spacecraft, so that how does the microbes which survive those extremophilic conditions, extremophilics, the microbes which are called known as extremophiles, which survive in this condition, what give them the protection? So they will be studying this, that what is that DNA expressions which gives the tolerance to such kind of space environments. So this experiments was also done collecting the microbes surviving around the spacecraft. Then they also have done experiments related to how do they keep themselves fit, like isometric exercises and the special space-based exercises which they have tested. So I think a lot of wealth of information in science has been done, including DNA expressions, which they have studied. So all this will be available for scientists like us, physiologists. I'm also a physiologist myself.
Right.
So to look at how do we do these experiments to make a longer missions. But now it's only 9 months, so maybe we may have to stay for months and years together. So how do you survive in those conditions? We will learn a lot from this lesson, which will be useful to our own Gaganyaan mission, which is being planned now. So a lot of learning would be happening, and the redundancy to be built, the backup measures to be built in the mission will all be important for our own ISRO mission. So we will learn a lot from this, the mission which they have carried out by NASA as well as the SpaceX. Then the other thing which you are talking about, the physiology. See, they have 3-4 stresses in physical stresses, like for example, no gravity or low gravity, hypogravity conditions. The primary one. Then you have the solar radiation and cosmic radiation coming and impinging on the astronauts who are there. So the other thing which you need to handle is what are the effects of the radiation which impacts. Then the third aspects would be the psychological, sensory deprivation, monotony, separation from family, fear of the unknown, and also the claustrophobic conditions in which they have to live for such a long time. These are all psychological challenges. So there are physical, physiological, and psychological challenges which impinge on long sojourn like what you have seen for the 9 months. So like cardiovascular deconditioning, that means all our hemodynamics is dependent on the gravity in when you are on earth. But the heart is here, brain is here. So brain is pumping the blood against the gravity to keep the cerebral perfusion of the brain, so that which has got all the centers, control centers, whether it's cardiac center, vasomotor center, respiratory center, feeding center, sleep center, everything is there. So you need to feed this control box with the energy, appropriate energy. So when you go to the space, suddenly the gravity is not there. So the whole blood rushes towards the cerebral system. And so then to adjust that blood pressure drops. So there is a relative hypotension, the low blood pressure over there. Because there are receptors, sensors, which are known as barosensors, baroreceptors, which respond to the pressure changes. Phasic variation in blood pressure is seen by the carotid sinus, where you have the baroreceptors, which regulates your phasic variations in blood pressure. So this is not there now. Gravity is not there. So the hemodynamics go haywire. That's the first thing which happens. So you feel heavy and your eyes are tortuous, the blood vessels dilate, and there's a heaviness on the head. So all this would be the feeling due to the hemodynamics. So when you come down, again, you will see the whole difference coming back to the gravitational condition. The deconditioning which has occurred, hemodynamic deconditioning, you need to restore that back. So that is why the people will be kept on stretchers in supine condition, so that there is no gravitational pull of the blood to pool in the venous, this accumulation of blood, and the venous return will decrease and cardiac output will decrease, cerebral perfusion will drop. All this will lead to orthostatic intolerance and syncope, which they may faint. So, which our friend was mentioning, Keith was mentioning. And so, this is one. The second is 9 month stay. There is a muscle loss and the proteins loss and the bone mineral density goes down. So these all weaken the musculoskeletal system, your weight bearing muscles, particularly at the back, at the spines, and also your leg or gastrocnemius, all those muscles which bear your weight, they lose, they undergo disuse atrophy because you are not using the muscles there. So the gravity is not there. So this again leads to muscular disuse atrophy. And when you come down to regain the muscle strength, it takes quite some time. Similarly, as he was mentioning, if you stay for 1 month, there's a 1% bone mineral density loss. So now how do they supplement with calcium, vitamin D? So all this will be given now to take care of the restoration of the neuromuscular and skeletal health, which is yet another problem which they'll be facing. Then you need to also come back. The psychological restoration depends on the resilience of these astronauts. So they are really robust. So they will regain seeing the family members and coming back to the earth, celebrating. So all that will bring back their psychological profile and the stress, even though they claim that they have not undergone. Certainly, any human system will undergo that psychological challenges which they certainly would have experienced, and that also has to be restored. So there are two phases: first 15 days, first 45 days, and then after 45 days. So if you want to see the restoration happening, the first will be acute care they will be giving to all this. So they should not have a fall, they're liable to be fractures, and then fall due to one is equilibrium, the semicircular canals in your ear. Besides having cochlea, you also have the control box for equilibrium maintenance in the ear. So that has to be restored back. So it takes a few days. And then also the disorientation which will happen due to that. Then your hemodynamic adjustments will happen again in a couple of days. So all this will be
Doctor,
there.
we'll talk more on that, but before you leave the show, I'd like to ask one important question. So, India is making significant strides in space exploration with the, ISRO's Gaganyaan mission and potential human space flight program. So, what advancements particularly should India focus on in space medicine and life sciences to support future human space missions, both nationally and in collaboration with other space agencies?
Right. See, we need to have a very rigorous selection process because selecting pilots, the astronauts, which you need to have the physical parameters, anthropometric dimensions, then you need to have the physiological testing in such simulated environments like low gravity situations, which they can simulate here. And then also looking at the psychological robustness. So the selection of crews is first part. Then the training, the rigorous training, both physical, and so we have analog stations, space analog stations, which we have created in Mars analog station in Ladakh, which has been created by Amity University as well as with ISRO jointly together in Leh. We have created, so we will have simulated the stay there in a capsules, which looking at the claustrophobic environment in which they have to stay. So the training is very important. So after selection, the training. Then you need to also plan for the right kind of diet, which will take care of all that adverse effects which I was mentioning, particularly with regard to the bone health, the muscle loss. Then the right kind of exercises, including yoga, meditation. So all this can be put in because that will keep their tranquility of the mind, resilience to face challenges when in flight, and also to take care of all the psychological challenges which I mentioned. So the meditation, yoga could be tried. In fact, Wing Commander Rakesh Sharma tried it in 1984 when we had sent this on a mission. So I think these are the ones, and then the experiments which they can do, including can you develop vaccines faster in low gravity situation, is yet another challenge which one can look at. And so there are many exciting things, and growing vegetables now in the which I mentioned, that we have sent the callus of spinach, which is now on space, which is doing very well, and germination of seeds, which we have done. So besides the aeroponics, which was demonstrated in this mission by Sunita Williams, and we have done
So just to interject, Dr. Selvamurthy, besides human being, was there also any other living being? I saw, pictures of Sunita Williams showing a spider. An experimental. There was an experiment in which the spiders were taken there, and in
yes.
fact, she was playfully saying how they were jumping onto its prey,
Because it's a
and
very robust organism, spider. So I think now slowly you will see the microbes, they will bring, analyze them. So we will know right from microbes to even small organism like spider, how do they behave in low gravity situation. So thank you so much. I enjoy talking to you. Now I have to go to another channel. I appreciate, thank you, Srinivasan, and thank you,
thank
Neha.
you,
Pleasure meeting you,
Thank,
Mr. K.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Sylvan.
thank you, Dr. Salamurthy.
Thank you. Thank
thank
you.
you very much.
So, before I move on to the next question, let's take a look at the graphics of NASA's single space flight record holders. Arun, please cue in the graphics. Thank you very much. So, this will actually set stage for my next question. So, here on screen, we have NASA's record holders for the longest single space flight. So, there we have Frank Rubio, 371 days, Mark Van der Hey, 355 days, Scott Kelly, 340 days, Christina Gotts, 328 days, Peggy Whitson, 289 days, Andrew Morgan, 272 days. We have three people, Janet Epps, Matthew Dominic, Mike Barrett, 235 days, and we have Michael Lopez Alegria, 215 days. So, Arun, we can have this graphics on air for a while. So, these astronauts actually spent an extended period in space, pushing the limits of human endurance. So, my question is to Dr. Siu, what happens to astronauts' body when they spend such a long time in microgravity? We know that Dr. Salamurthy just covered it. So, could you please add more to what he said, and what are the biggest physical, physiological, mental challenges they face during their mission and after returning to Earth?
So perhaps the most interesting of those on the graph there is Scott Kelly. So Scott Kelly is actually an identical twin, and his brother Mark Kelly was a retired astronaut. So they took part in a very unique experiment where we had one astronaut up on the space station for 1 full year, another astronaut on the ground, and they did lots and lots and lots of measurements. Everything from the amount of mutations in their DNA to the difference in gene expression, the health of their immune systems, and the microbiome, so all the different bacteria, virus, etc. And some of the things they found were that there was definitely alterations in the immune system. So space in particular seems to kind of dampen down your immune system. One surprising finding was that your telomeres, these kind of sections of DNA at the end of your chromosomes that can correlate with kind of how old your cells are, actually got longer in space flight, which was kind of unexpected. We normally think of space as kind of modeling aging. So you see kind of a lot of the same symptoms as you get with rapid aging. And they got actually quite long during space flight. The main things that were pointed out previously are the bone loss, the muscle loss. That's the one that everyone kind of looks for. But you also get something called space-acquired neuroocular syndrome. So this is where, because of the fluid shift up from the legs and the body up towards the head, you actually get a buildup of pressure in the eyes, and it can slightly change the shape of your eyeball. And so actually a lot of astronauts go up with full, perfect vision, coming back needing glasses. And then it can also cause these things called woolly spots. So you start to see kind of deformations of the microvasculature at the back of the eye. So that's certainly one thing that we see. There's something else that's given the nickname space brain. So as you're getting lots of this space radiation coming at you, and that can cause cognitive issues with people. There's a few other bits and pieces that are kind of on the emerging side, where we see retroviruses like herpes can be reactivated within you. You start to see some things with the microbiome on the space station where they start expressing drug-resistant genes. And so there's a lot of kind of things yet to be explored. And one of the areas that our work looked on was kidney stones. So astronauts have a 7 to 14 times higher risk of kidney stones during spaceflight, and that risk persists when they return to Earth, with about a 2 to 7-fold higher risk in the first year after returning to space. And so that's another thing that they can face as well.
Srinivasan, let me come to you now. So this is not the first time an astronaut's stay in space has been extended, nor is it the first time astronauts have been launched in one spacecraft and returned in another. So why did this mission generate so many headlines in media?
Well, the way the International Space Station is designed, a seven-member crew always, they can send seven-member crew, and that's what it stays. And it's been a collaborative effort where Russians, Europeans, Americans, even Japanese, I mean, these are the crews who have been there. And they also bring others. For instance, next year, probably one of our own astronaut is going to go. So they do their experiments there, like our earlier scientists explained, because you get a microgravity environment where some of these experiments can yield better results and are comparable to what we do on the Earth. So what happened was that it was a mission plan where the Starliner went up, Boeing's Starliner went up, and after it docked, they discovered that there was some helium leak, and helium is the fuel which actually fires the engine, and it's a pretty dangerous situation because when the re-entry happens for the vehicle, it, as I told you earlier, it generates huge heat, about 3,000 degree Fahrenheit, and it is so powerful that it can strip electrons of atoms, and a new state plasma is generated around that. And in fact, so powerful that even it cuts off all communication. That's why there is a bit of a darkness in communication for a few minutes when the spacecraft is actually descending. So you have such situations who they realize, out of caution for the safety of the crew, that they will stay back, and the Starliner returned empty. The NASA was forced to bring back around September. It was expected that some other replacement could go. Earlier, it was planned in February, and there are two vendors actually NASA has. One is Boeing, the other is SpaceX. So the SpaceX actually was given a lesser funding, almost half of what Boeing was given. And in fact, they turned out to be more efficient. And there they send this mission, which with 4 other crew, which is 9, which is called crew 9, and they descended. The crew 10 they descended, and then we have brought back crew 9, which included Butch, Wilmore, and Sunita Williams. So what happened was when the earlier Starliner of Boeing returned empty, but it could land safely. There was a worry whether re-entry will have any problem, but it didn't have. It did land safely, and now scientists are trying to find out what was the fault and why this leak happened. And that's the examination which is still going on, perhaps. And meanwhile, because of this unusual extension of the stay, from what they originally planned, 8 to 10 days, because they're testing Starliner, turned out to be a 9-month affair. So there are a lot of concern among people here on, so generally people may not know the details of how, an astronaut is trained and what are their endurance power and how long they can stay. So in general, there was a lot of worry among people on the Earth, and therefore a lot of speculations. And there was a bit of politics also added in January, when Trump made a statement saying that, I would have brought him back. Biden has abandoned him, and it was a purely political statement. NASA acts independently. It's an autonomous body, and it doesn't need to take permission of White House whether they should bring back their crew or how the scheduling is done, and all those kinds of things are there. But yeah, of course, he immediately asked Elon Musk, who happens to be the owner of SpaceX, And another drama was added when he said, "Okay, I'll bring them back." And he is today now on his micro blogging site X has said, just use one word, congratulations. So all this drama added more concern among people around the world, and there was a lot of talk because, after all, human beings are there, and whether they can return from this, space safely was a question on everybody's mind. So today, all that has ended. That's why this whole episode has become so publicized. Otherwise, in normal terms, nobody would have noticed. It would have been just another mission.
Can we actually say that it strengthens SpaceX dominance in NASA contracts then?
Yeah, obviously, SpaceX has scored kind of this thing here. I mean, that is evident because eventually they are the one who brought back. They're doing other things also. Like for instance, like I said, when the certain blackout happened, there is a experiment which they are doing, and probably they have even demonstrated it. This blackout happens because of plasma, as I said earlier. So what they are doing is their own satellites. The Starlink satellite, which is Elon Musk, another project. They have put satellites at a height above, the stratosphere, and that is able to connect with the, descending spacecraft. So the communication, in a way, they are trying to prove that can be a continuous one. It need not get disconnected. So that's another thing they're doing. Obviously, they seem to be smarter, but then you cannot completely write off Boeing. Boeing is one of the oldest, aviation company. They had trouble with two accidents on, I think, 737 Max. I think, yeah, they had two setbacks, and then this one. I'm sure they will, recover. They will rework, and NASA is not one who's suddenly going to abandon anyone because there have been a lot of capital investment in these projects, and these are long-term projects. The politics apart, and in space, there are a lot of uncertainties, and such setbacks do happen. I think they would be working furiously to get back.
Let me come to Dr. CU now. Dr. CU, so space flight studies, including the one that you did, have provided insights that can benefit not just astronauts but also people on Earth facing similar, health challenges. So, with NASA and ISRO focusing on longer missions, these findings are more relevant than ever. So, how can space medicine research, particularly in areas like bone density loss, cardiovascular health, and kidney function, contribute to improving medical treatments for people on Earth?
So, space can be quite a good model for bone disease, muscle disease, heart disease. Patients who are on bed rest, for example, so those in intensive care, some of the situations can be quite similar. So, some of the treatments we develop in space could be easily redeployed or hopefully redeployed here on Earth. One example would be for the kidney. So, we showed in our work that the kidney, under spaceflight conditions, simulating a trip to Mars, would suggest that there's going to be long-term permanent damage to the kidney. Now, this is very likely not being detected at the moment. It's what we would call subclinical. But over a long mission, like a 2.5-year to 3-year trip, where you're receiving lots of this space radiation, and to just emphasize how bad this thing can be for you, it's about 90% of hydrogen nuclei, so protons, about 16 to 10% can be helium nuclei, and then 1% are going to be made up of something called HZE, or these heavy charged elementary particles. And these are atoms as large as iron, traveling near the speed of light coming from exploding stars in our galaxy going through our bodies. It can be quite damaging. So in our research, one of our hopes is that if we can develop drugs that would prevent damage to the kidneys of astronauts, those could be redeployed for patients who are undergoing radiotherapy for cancer here on Earth. So if you are unfortunate enough to have a cancer like leukemia or bladder cancer that requires abdominal or total body radiation, the organ that will limit the dose of radiation is your kidney, because it's incredibly susceptible to this sort of damage. So if we have drugs that can increase the amount of radiation you can receive safely and preserve your kidney function, we could more effectively treat those cancers, as one example of those things. Another thing would be in aging, we lose muscle mass. So anything we can do to stave off muscle loss in spaceflight, we would be able to help people who are getting elderly and more frail. So if you're over the age of 60, particularly if you're a woman, if you have a fall, that's one of the most likely things to kill you if you enter into the hospital. So it's about 30 to 40% can cause long-term debilitating or life or loss of life. So increasing strength of muscles in your legs, for example, is really important and something again we can learn from spaceflight.
Dr. CU, my last question to you again. Can you please give us a comprehensive account on the restoration process after the astronauts come back to Earth, and how is the restoration process different for women and men?
So the process, as your colleague before was highlighting, there's going to be an acute phase. So the first thing they're going to try to eliminate is any sort of issues that could be life-threatening or could lead them to kind of have any harm. So especially if they're having any issues with blood flow to the brain due to the adjustments of blood pressure. So they don't want to have them fall, faint, or if there's decreased bone mineral density, they have a high risk of fractures. They're the initial things that they're going to try and take care of. And then in the 45-day kind of window, that's when they're going to be really working on your cardiovascular health. So doing lots of sort of cardiovascular exercises, so aerobic, and then resistance exercise. They're going to try and make sure you're building back up your muscle mass. And they'll be doing nutritional as well as exercise, try and build up some of the bone mineral density. Unfortunately, some of the things in space we haven't seen reverse in the long term. So to my knowledge, it's almost impossible to regain all your bone mineral density after spaceflight. So if you're an astronaut who's gone up for a year or for several missions, so some cosmonauts have been up for almost 1,000 days, they will have a lifelong decrease in bone mineral density. We've also seen histories from astronauts from the Canadian Space Agency where they've seen stiffening of their arteries, and that can it mimics this kind of advanced aging, and that seems to be very hard to reverse as well. In terms of men and women, there's ongoing research at the moment. So some of my colleagues are investigating effects on the reproductive tract. We know from some of Chris Mason's work over at Weill Cornell and Afshin Beheshti at Pittsburgh that there are differences in response from men and women to spaceflight. In fact, women seem to be generally a little bit more resistant to some of the stuff, particularly around the immune system. So at the moment, there's not a great deal of difference, to my knowledge, in how we recondition the astronauts after spaceflight. But in the future, we may try and tailor this a bit more specifically.
Thank you for your time, Dr. CU. And I have Dr. TV Venkatesan with me. Thank you so much for joining. Before I come to Dr. TVV, Mr. Srinivasan, in your recent response, you just spoke about Shubhanshu Shukla. So, Shubhanshu Shukla, we have a graphics on it. Arun, if you can play it right now. Yeah, thank you. So, Shubhanshu Shukla is said to make history as the first ISRO astronaut to travel to the International Space Station aboard the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. And he will serve as the pilot for this groundbreaking mission, marking a significant milestone for India in human spaceflight. He's a distinguished Air Force pilot with over 2,000 hours of flight experience, and he had rigorous training at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Russia. So also let's see a bit about the A-Expo mission. It is a significant cooperation between NASA and ISRO, paving the way for enhanced global cooperation in space exploration. The A-Expo crew will spend up to 15 days aboard the International Space Station, engaging in various critical activities, including scientific researches, outreach and education, commercial projects, and the A-Expo mission will feature an international crew with experienced astronauts from multiple countries. For example, the commander is Peggy Whitson, who's from USA, and the mission specialists are Stavros from Poland and Tibor from Hungary. Thank you for the graphics, Arun. Srini sir, this question is to you. So India will be very closely watching this development. Could you please brief us on what are the missions lined up for India in the coming days?
I think, before a complete mission, I think we have a Gaganyaan as a major one. where we want more, both manned and unmanned. But before that, what is happening is a number of tested. Like we have, already tested airdrop test, basically unmanned flight. We have tried few things. We have tried docking, as we saw, docking and docking. That's very important. We are also in plans for human space mission. I think the most crucial of all this is going to be the re-entry, technology, because when from space the capsule enters the atmosphere, that's when it faces intense heat, and the shield, which is at the bottom of uh, you know capsule, is what protects the crew, and that technology need to be tested. I think all these experiments, also there is something called PLSS, which is portable life support system, which basically has the last resort for the astronauts to save themselves, which will also determine their oxygen pressure, ventilation, other things. Also the avionics. I think these are several components, and since we are a pretty frugal in our spending, all these experiments are being done, and they have to come together for the next missions, which we're planning very ambitiously. Uh, we are collaborating very closely with Japanese on many of these, and they are quite enthused with our own, research findings, and that's why these things are happening. So I feel, also there is a plan for Bharat, the Antriksh station, like international station. The station is actually getting aging. Right now, the international station is aging, and so there is also our very powerful rockets will take the components, and they have to set up our own station. So a lot of ambitious projects lined up in the coming years. The other very important thing is the training of the crew. Like you mentioned, these four gentlemen, the Air Force, selected from Air Force, are being trained. Their endurance level, their various, uh, adaptation to various situations. All these things are happening in a simulated environment, and they are also being taken around, various parts of the world. The crew was earlier in Russia. I think now they've gone to. I think one of them is in the US getting trained. So all these process will take. Apparently, it takes about 2.5 years for a astronaut to get trained to various situations. So what looks to us a very simple thing, there's a lot of complex maneuvers going behind. Even the scientists, we only see these stars because they are human beings, and they are in the forefront. Like you see anchors in news channels who seem to be the stars, but behind them there's a lot of producers who actually work day and night to produce what the anchors read out as news. Similarly, what you see is astronauts, but behind them there's a lot of scientists who are working. They have to look for a lot of minute things. For instance, what happens to the accumulation of carbon dioxide inside the spaceship or inside the capsule. They have to have a mechanism, constant oxygen supply, constant pressure maintenance, and these are very high stress and environment in which these stations are working. All kind of exigencies, water, and they also have ability to produce water in the space station, food, and then such eventuality where a person has to stay extra for 9 months, not 1 or 2 days. They have to have enough stocking of the food that it lasts, uh, and then their own personal hygiene and health. So the whole lot of issues which they really plan for. It's. I think Indians are learning fast, and I'm sure Dr. Venkatesh will be able to throw more light on this. But it's certainly very fascinating times.
Before I come to Dr. TVV, let's revisit the last few crucial stages of this mission with the time map. Arun, if we may have the graphics, please. So Here we have on screen the last few crucial stages of this mission. The hatch of the SpaceX Dragon capsule closed at 8:15 a.m. Indian Standard Time on March 18. This sealed the astronauts inside, marking the final moments of their stay aboard the International Space Station after months in microgravity. And 2 hours later, that is 10:15 a.m. again in Indian Standard Time, undocking began, and at 10:35 a.m. IST, Crew 9 officially separated from the ISS. Uh, the capsule moved away in a controlled maneuver, gradually distancing itself from the ISS before beginning its return to Earth. Then we come to March 19, that is today. After traveling through space for several hours, uh, the critical deorbit burn happened at 2:45 a.m. IST again on March 19. It was initially said that the deorbit burn will happen at 2:41 a.m., but it happened at 2:45, and the final splashdown took place at 3:28 a.m. Indian time. Professor, I'm coming to you now. We've covered the whole Sunita Williams stranded in space situation extensively, but could you please brush up on this a bit? The word stranded was used a lot in the reportage that Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore were stranded in space due to Starliner's issues, but NASA has maintained that they were safe and had a planned return. So, how do you review this narrative? Was this truly a risky situation or just a delay due to safety precautions? Doctor, you're muted. Could you please unmute?
Uh, I'll just add a few points here. I mean, let's get the thing picture clear. The mission of Sunita Williams and Will Bushmore was essentially to test fly the Boeing's Starliner, a craft that NASA wanted to keep as a backup or maybe as a complement to SpaceX. They gave contract to these two companies. So they were expecting Boeing to also provide that spacecraft so that much more trips can be planned for ISS. But unfortunately, as we all know, that the flight faced a lot of issues, particularly the helium leak issues, so it could not be operated. And then they tried for almost 1 month, 1.5 months, trying to rework whether one can some or other manage with that spacecraft to come back, but didn't work. So then you had two options. So the second option is that you can send a craft, bring these two people back home, or if they are agreeable, and mostly that's what they are trained for, you can make them part of the next cycle of crew who are staying in International Space Station and maintaining and continuing routine work. So when Sunita Williams reached there, there was the 71st expedition crew. 7 people were over there, and then the 72nd expedition was about to begin. So they became part of the 72nd expedition. So instead of sending 7 people, only 5 people were sent from Earth as a replacement. And Sunita Williams was the commander of this particular mission, that is this 72nd cycle. So there, the 72nd cycle is over, and now 73rd, the first part of the 73rd, that is the 4 people for the 73rd have reached the International Space Station. So 4 people are coming back. So standard is not exactly a correct word, but I think in media sometimes we want a catchy headline, so somewhere it started and then it became a kind of a common practice. And I think a bit of American election also played a part. That is how Trump used this, what was kind of there in the media to his benefit, saying that, oh, they are stranded there, nobody cared about them. I'll ask my friend to send a craft. I mean, this kind of narrative also got built up during the American election, and world over, some media got enthralled by it, and then they also started promoting it. So this whole atmosphere of, I mean, she got stranded there and so on and so forth got fixed in public mind. But the fact is that there were 7 people. She was the commander of that 7 people. All the 7 people are going to come back to the Earth. 4 have come. The other 3 are going to come by Soyuz mission in a few weeks down the line. And then 3 new people are going to go there. I mean, it's a routine part of it. Got missed in this whole chapter. That's what if I want to put a very short, brief report of all this thing, that's what is what we have seen.
So Williams and Wilmore, had to return on SpaceX Crew Dragon instead. So what does this tell us about the reliability of spacecraft for long duration missions? What lessons can be learned from this delay for future space missions?
Yeah, so if one looks at it, the Boeing company has been facing this issue of reliability of their technology for quite a long time, including their aircraft. There have been some whistleblowers and quite a lot of talk about Boeing's compromise on quality and so on. So this is not going to be a good news for. This is not a good news for Boeing company in that sense, if one looks at it. If one has to look at the expansion of, let's say, private agencies in space, my problem is not that the private agencies are building spacecraft or NASA is contracting them. That's not the key issue. The problem is, what's the international law? There are some international agreements that have been developed, designed, and then enacted in the last 50, 60 years. You have a space law, you have a moon law, what is popularly called as moon law. How all this are fitting in that? So does it mean that just because some private companies in US can do it with US political power, the rest of the world should be silent? That's a kind of question that I think is emerging here. So what you are seeing is very similar to the Wild West in US in early 1800s. Who gave you the right to go there and say that this land belongs to me, and then I will distribute for anyone who comes from Europe and so on? It's the same kind of question that one is asking about space. So I think that is where I think international challenge lies, not that a private company is building.
The
You always
diplomacy of it.
you will always have some technological issues. One can manage it. One can find ways of handling it. The last question is that what does the space, who owns space? Are we looking at it as something like Antarctica, where there'll be a proper international cooperation, or it's like a finder keeper? That's a kind of question that we need to grapple at the international level at this point. That's what I feel.
That's a heavy question, Dr. TVV. We've come to the fag end of the show, but before I end, Srinisa, I have one last question for you. So NASA has relied, heavily on private companies like SpaceX and Boeing to transport astronauts. And as India's space sector opens up, do you think ISRO will also rely on private companies like Skyroot or Agnikul in future human human spaceflight missions?
Actually, ISRO has been using private players for quite a long time. It's not just new. Parts of PSLV were built by private players, although design and then quality check is still in the ISRO's hand. Private players have been part of ISRO story right from the beginning. It's not new. Right from the beginning, almost from the beginning. So the question here is, for example, you have an international space station, which are within codes under the political sovereignty of countries. Like, for example, officially, if you look at the international space station, one part belongs to Russia. So the laws applied over there are Russian laws. The remaining part belongs to US. So the laws applied over there are US laws. So now, if instead of international space station, you are going to have Axim, a private company's space station, what law? Who is going to maintain law there?
Yeah, so I would. Yeah, I think
Yes, Srinisa, you got it.
you raise important questions. TV, I just want to ask you one thing before you leave. The issue here is, what are the lessons for Indian space mission? See, the finding, the funding, the majority of funding has to come from the government. See, the private sector can assist because the investments are huge levels, and in R&D investment in India in any case is pretty low. So to expect private sector to that kind of R&D is pretty tough. But that apart, what are the kind of immediate lessons you think can be learned from this? Because we are still taking baby steps in many of the preliminary technologies. But since already these things have happened, we have a better line of sight now.
Yeah. So what I think is we need to learn two things. One is we should harvest low hanging fruits. There are opportunities for launching, let's say, microsats, nanosats, low Earth orbit satellites for private players, where I think startups and others can play a role. They should be that there should be an environment for that. We don't need to close that. That's one apart. But would you go blindly in the American way, the way they, for example, the kind of development that is taking place in the US? I'm not very sure. It's not good for India. It's not good for the world. So it's not just. I mean, we have to also look at the all over the world. For example, today, ISRO is taking effort, meaning that it is also spending extra money, ensuring that it won't leave too much of space junk. Basically, because there is an international negotiation which is non-binding, non-judicial, but it's a morally you accept it and do it. Are we really expecting that private players would play by these rules? Really? Is it what the history tells us? So then what happens if there are too much of space junk? Who is responsible for clearing it? So it will be like somebody will pollute and the public money will be used for clearing it. It will be once again the same story. So these are actually the issues. So if you look at India, I think in terms of launch of nano satellites and things of that kind, or ballistic payloads, there is going to be, I mean, noticeable private participation in addition to what was there earlier. But I don't think in India we see that kind of a very encouraging investment from private sector in space area, although there have been quite a lot of talk about it. So at least for near future, let's say for about next 10 years, it's going to come from public money. So given that it's going to come from public money, I think the public good, I think, has to be one key aspect of the whole space program that India is charting for itself.
Srinivasa, your final comments?
Yeah, I do feel that this little uncertainty which has been created by the two astronauts who stuck there and they are now back now. It actually has triggered a lot of interest of people in space, a lot more than what it normally would have been. I think that's very good for science, and also since it's been politicized a bit, and Trump has really politicized by saying, "I'm going to bring it back," and Elon Musk added an element of drama to that. All this, I mean, if you look at from the positive side, it does generate more curiosity among the people, and that's a positive side of it. And more youngsters are now keen to go to space because they're learning a lot more. If you have to happen to see all the videos which have been put out by NASA all these days, and especially when it has a human element in it, somebody from Gujarat. I mean, there have been prayers and temples whole night in Gujarat last night for Sunita Williams. So all these things really motivates people. That's a positive fallout of what I see here. That India's space, there's always been a fascination among youngsters to be in the space, but then it gets more, qualitative and a quantitative dimension to that. That's what I feel.
Interesting times ahead. Thank you so much all for joining. Thank you, Dr. CU. Thank you, Dr. TVV. Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. Thank you.
Thank you.